everybody, welcome back to the video. It's me, Miss D, your favorite math teacher out there. So just basically going over this review for you so that you have something to study from. Please be sure to also check Edline for answer keys and blank copies of the review to practice. Alright, well, here we go. First question is a circle. Circles are pretty easy. Circle basic formula is x squared plus y squared equals r squared. The radius is going to be equal to the square root of r squared. So if we look here, r squared is equal to 25. So the radius will be equal to the square root of 25, which is 5. So now to graph this, we're going to go 5 to the right, label it, 5 up, label it, 5 to the left, label it, and 5 down, label it. Please don't forget to label because you know how strict I'm going to be when it comes to labeling. Alright, so now you're going to connect your dots, always have a center. So I'm not going to use the cheat tool, I'm going to make my circle. Okay, and once you make your circle, you draw a line to anywhere in the circle, really doesn't matter, and you indicate what the radius is. And there you have it. Okay, graphing a circle. Okay, the next one's different. When you see the coefficients are the same, that means it's a circle. If the coefficients were different, that would be an ellipse and we would answer it differently. So because they're the same, you are not going to, divide by 48. Instead, you're actually dividing by 3. So when you divide everything by 3, you get x squared, y squared, and 16. So remember, r squared is equal to the last number. Take the square root. The radius is going to be 4. So just like the last question, we're going to go 4 to the right, label it, 4 up, label it, 4 to the left, label it, and 4 down, label it. Make sure that you have a center, and then make your circle. Okay, and then you just pick a point anywhere on the circle and label that as your radius. And that concludes drawing circles. Now let's write the equation in standard form. Remember, the standard form of the equation of a circle is x squared plus y squared equals r squared. Our radius right now is the square root of 7. So I'm just going to square that. And remember, when you square a square root, everything knocks out. So your answer is going to be x squared plus y squared is equal to not 49, but actually just 7. Okay, because really what the square root of 7 is the square root of 7 times the square root of 7, which is the square root of 49. That's why it's only 7. So that's why when you square a square root, you can just drop everything and write what you have left. So you do not have to do this part, but I was just showing you why the answer is 7. Okay, the next one, when you pass through a point, that means you're going to replace each of these points for x and y into your standard form. So x is -5, make sure it's in parentheses. Y is -12, make sure that's in parentheses. Because if you don't put in parentheses, your calculator won't forget to do a negative times a negative. It will forget to do a negative times a negative as a positive. So -5 squared is 25. -12 squared is 144. Add these two together, you get 169. 169 is r squared. Okay? If you take the square root, r is 13. But we don't want 13. We want 169. Because remember, we're looking for r squared. So your answer would be x squared plus y squared equals 169, not 13. Okay? Remember that 13 is solely there just for your radius, but remember the equation needs radius squared. Alright, so that concludes circles. So remember, for circles you need to remember two things. The standard form, and you need to remember that the radius will be equal to the radius squared, the square root of the radius squared. Alright, so remember those two things. Oh, and also remember that the center of our circles will always be at 0, 0. Don't forget that. Alright, now we're moving on to parabolas. Parabolas have two basic formulas. We have x squared equals 4py, or y squared equals 4px. 4py is on the y-axis, so p is focus. So what this is saying is focus on y-axis. So if the focus is on the y-axis, you're either going up or down. What this is saying is focus is on the x-axis, which means your picture is going to be going left or right. Okay, looking at our example, x squared equals negative 16y, that means that it is in line with this equation, which means that my focus will be on the y-axis. So if you also look, our lattice rectum is equal to 4p. Well, in this case, 4p is equal to negative 16. This is our lattice rectum. This is our distance through the focus. So when we draw a picture, this will be very important to us. So now to solve it, we're going to divide by 4, because our goal is to solve for the focus. And remember, the focus is always p. So when we divide by 4, our focus is negative 4. Now we need to remember to write the focus as a coordinate. So because the focus is on the y-axis, we are going to write the focus as 0, negative 4. Our directrix is a line that goes through whatever axis we're looking at. So it goes through the y-axis. It's always the opposite of the focus. So if the focus is negative 4, the directrix is going to be positive 4. But remember, all lines, since it's a line, has to have an equation. So this is the equation, y equals 4. If you miss the y equals, you will lose points. Alright, so now we're going to have center at 0, 0. We're going to go down 4, label it. We're going to go up 4, make a line going through that point, label it. Then we're going to do our lattice rectum. Since that is 16, I'm going to count 16 all the way across the focus, because it has to go through the focus. So 16 all the way across would probably be 8 to the right and 8 to the left. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect this dot, and this dot together. And now I've made my parabola. Okay, remember your parabola has to go towards the focus, so it's almost like Pac-Man eating the dot. That's your focus. This is your parabola. Okay, the next one is going to use the y squared equals 4px formula. That means that my focus is on the x-axis. So if my focus is on the x-axis, that means this should end in 0 and this should start with x equals. So before I even do anything, I can get that out the way so I don't lose points. So now I'm going to take my lattice rectum, which is 7, and set it equal to 4p. Okay, that's your lattice rectum. We'll use that later. So now solve for p. So p is equal to 7/4, or some of you I know did 1.75. That's fine. I don't mind that because we'll use the 1.75 for graphing. So remember, your focus is on the x-axis, so this is going to come first, and then we'll end it with 0. That means my directrix is the opposite. So the opposite of 7/4 is going to be negative 7/4. X equals. So now when we graph it, focus is on the x-axis. So I'm going to go right to the x-axis and graph my 1.75. So 1.75 is right before 2. And I'm going to label it. Negative 1.75 is on this side, but we actually are drawing a line through that point. And we label that with the name. Now remember, your center is always at 0, 0. So now to do the latus rectum, because we have to have the distance of the parabola going through the focus has to be 7. So 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. So to graph this, I'm going to go up 3.5 from the focus and down 3.5 from the focus, because these dots have to go in the same line as the focus. Okay, so if the focus is here, I go up and down. If the focus was on the y-axis, I would look left and right. So now I'm just going to connect vertex to my latus rectum points, and I am done. Alright, when they give you the focus, you're going to be using the standard form equation. This is the y-axis, so that means that I need to focus on the y-axis. Focus is always P. So you're going to take your P value and replace it into the focus. So this stays the same, this stays the same, this stays the same. The only thing that changes is your P value. So now once you multiply those two together, that gives you the standard equation, which is going to be negative 8y. We're done. That's it. Okay, once you get the focus, plug it in and then write it. Now this is the directrix. It is also on the y-axis, but this equation has the focus. This is the focus. So because that's the focus, I need to change this to the focus. Well, how do I do that? To do that, you're just going to change this from negative to positive, and that's your focus. Now you have to decide, am I putting 0 after or 0 before? Well, because this is the y-axis, 0 will come before. Now once I've figured out what the focus is, it will go here. So now when I write my formula, x squared stays the same, 4 stays the same, y stays the same. So now the only thing that changes is 1/3. Well, 4 times 1/3 is 4/3. And that will be my equation. Please do not, I repeat, do not write the decimal. I'm telling you, please don't write the decimal, okay? Since this is an equation, you want to keep it with fractions. Alright, so we're done with parabolas. So remember, for parabolas, to remember, we have two forms. We have x squared equals 4py and y squared equals 4px. Also, thing you have to remember is the focus is p. And for this one, the focus will be 0p. And for this one, the focus will be p0. The other thing you have to remember is the directrix is going to be the opposite of the focus. So for this equation, the directrix is on the y-axis, so it would be y equals opposite. That negative means opposite. It doesn't always mean that it's negative. And here it would be x equals opposite of p. Okay, and the last thing you have to remember is your latus rectum. Your latus rectum is equal to 4p. So 4p would be your distance of the parabola going through the focus. So you have to draw your lattice rectum points. If you don't draw them, you will lose points. Also remember that if your equation is on the y-axis, you are going up or down. And if your equation is on the x-axis, it is going left or right. Okay, so to help you with parabolas, remember Pac-Man. Alright, the next thing, and we're almost done, we got 2 more conics, is your ellipse. You know it's an ellipse because you have different denominators here with the plus sign. So the first thing we have to do is remember you have 2 standard forms for ellipse, where we have x squared plus y squared, x squared over a squared equals y squared over b squared equals 1, or x squared over b squared y squared over a squared equals 1. A represents the bigger number. So the bigger number is your vertex. So vertex, in this case, will be the square root of the bigger number. Well, if I look at this example, my bigger number is 25. So the vertex will come, which is a, from the square root of 25, which I know is 5. Since that's on the x-axis, I have to end in 0. So 5, 0, and negative 5, 0. Okay, the next thing is my covertex. My covertex is always b. It's always a smaller number. So b is my covertex. It will be the square root of the smaller number, where in this case the smaller number is 16. So the square root of 16 is 4. Well, that's on the y-axis, so I have to write it as 0, 4 and 0, negative 4. So now I'm just going to connect my dots. Try not to make it look like a football, please. So try to curve it around. So I'm pretty much almost done. The last thing I need is my focus. My focus equation is equal to the square root of my bigger number minus the smaller number. Okay, it all stems from the formula c squared equals a squared minus b squared. So a squared we already know is 25. B squared we already know is 16. So c squared equals 9. But in order to graph my focus, I need to know what c squared is. C is equal to, so the square root, c is equal to 3. So my focus is 3. Focus is always in line with the vertex. The vertex is on the x-axis. So if you took a highlighter and highlighted the x-axis, you would know that everything needs to go on the x-axis except for the covertices. So focus will go here, and the other focus will go here. And that's my ellipse. Okay, we have another ellipse to graph, but this is not in standard form. So you have to make sure that you divide by 1024 to get it into standard form. Remember, it has to equal 1. So I'm left with x squared over 64 plus y squared over 16 equals 1. So once again, my bigger number is 64. So my a value will be equal to the square root of 64, which gives me 8. That's still the x-axis, so it'll be 8, 0 and negative 8, 0. My covertex is on the y-axis. That is going to be b, which is the square root of 16. That's equal to 0, 4, and 0, negative 4. So I'm going to plot those and label. Please label. Now once you have your 4 dots, you're going to connect them. Try to go around and not make a football. It's almost like the rings of Jupiter. That's the rings of Jupiter. That's more of like what an ellipse is. Alright, last thing we gotta do now is the focus. Focus is equal to c squared equals a squared minus b squared. We know that that's a squared. This is b squared because bigger minus small. If this comes out negative, you did it wrong. Okay? If that comes out negative, you did it wrong. So that equals 48. And c equals the square root of 48. So now we're just going to label it as square root 48, comma 0, and negative square root 48, comma 0. Square root of 48 is approximately 6 point something. It's like 6.7, 6.8. So we're going to plot that right after 6. And we are finished. Okay, now we're going to go into writing the equation of an ellipse. The equation of an ellipse stems from your standard form. Remember, A represents your vertex. It's always the bigger number. B represents your co-vertex. And C represents your focus. If the question gives you the co-vertex and the vertex, you just have to plug them into the formula. Since this starts out with 0, 7, that means that we have to use this formula down here. So we're going to have x squared over 7 squared. Oops, backwards. Okay, so instead we're going to have x squared over negative 2 squared plus y squared over 7 squared equals 1. So that means that this value here for the co-vertex was right here, and for the vertex was right here. Okay. So once you square them, you get x squared over 4. And make sure that's in parentheses because you should have no negatives. Y squared over 49 equals 1. So you should be happy if they give you vertex and co-vertex. Now the next question actually gives you the focus. Once you see the focus, you know that that's C. You know you have to use this formula. So that means C is square root of 11 squared. A is not given to us. And B is 5 squared. So now you work it out. The square of a square root knocks everything out and you're left with 11. A squared we're solving for. And b squared is 25. Now just solve for a squared. Add 25 on both sides. That means that a squared is equal to 36, meaning that a is 6. But we are not solving for 6, we're solving for a squared. This is what we want without the square root, because a squared is what goes into the formula. So because the co-vertex is on the x-axis, the formula will be x squared over b squared plus y squared over a squared equals 1. So now I'm going to put x squared over b squared, which is 25, plus y squared over a squared, which we solved for to be 36, and it all equals 1. Phew, a lot of work. Alright, so we are now done with ellipses. So for ellipses, you have to remember your two standard forms, which are here. Okay. You also have to remember that a equals the bigger number, b equals the smaller number, and c, your focus, is equal to the square root of the vertex squared minus the co-vertex squared. So remember, this is your vertex, this is your co-vertex. Alright, remember, if you need to figure out which one to use, if the vertex starts with 0, it's going under the y. If the vertex ends in 0, it's going underneath the x. And remember, for this picture, it's going to be more horizontal. For this picture, it's going to be more vertical. Oh, and also remember the formula for focus. Alright, last but not least are hyperbolas. Hyperbolas are different, whereas the formula for the hyperbola is all based on the first number. So notice the position of y squared changes. So vertex is equal to the square root of the of the first denominator. Okay, we don't really have any concerns about the covertex. We use it to graph, but we don't really need the covertex. The other thing you need to know is the asymptote. The asymptote will be equal to either a over b, x, don't forget the x, and that's plus or minus b over a, x. Okay, if your vertex is on the x-axis, so if your vertex is on the x-axis, you're going to use this one. If your vertex is on the y-axis, you will use the top one. So it all depends on where your vertex is. So the asymptote for this one would be a over b, and the asymptote for this one would be b over a. Okay, and the last thing you have to know is your focus formula. It is the Pythagorean theorem. Alright, so now let's look at this. Our first number was 25, which means that the vertex, which is a, was equal to the square root of 25, which we know as 5. That is on the x-axis, so it's going to be 5, 0, and negative 5, 0. Meaning that since this starts with x, my major, or what they call the transverse axis, will be the x-axis. So that means all of my pictures will be based off of this axis, which means I am going to be going left and right. If it started with y squared, my pictures would be going up and down. Alright, I also need to know what to do with the square root of 9. That helps me create my box, so the square root of 9 is 3. So I will be using 3, 0, and negative 3, 0 in my picture. Okay, now with these points, I'm going to make a box. So to make the box, you see where 3 meets with 5. Where does 3 and 5 meet? They meet right here. Where does 3 and 5 meet here? Where does 3 and 5, or 5 and 3 meet here? And 5 and 3 meets here. So you just make a box to where the blue and the red meet. Now connect your box. Oh, I did that in class. Make sure that your box goes through the vertex and also goes through the other point. Now the reason why you make a box is because you need to make asymptotes, which are these things. So your asymptotes are always going from corner to corner. So I'm going to connect from corner to corner. I'm going to do it again, corner to corner. Think of the right angles of a rectangle. That's where you're connecting your vertex, your asymptote. So now to write the value of the asymptote, it's going to be how far up and over you went. Well, I went up 3 and over 5. X. And then on the other side, I went up 3 over 5. X, but it's negative. Alright, now the last thing I'm going to do, well, last two things, is I'm going to draw my focus. So I should go up and around the asymptote. That's why you draw the asymptotes, because it lets you see how wide you're supposed to have your hyperbola. Now the last thing is the focus. The formula for focus is the Pythagorean theorem. So it's c squared equals 5 squared plus 3 squared. So c squared is equal to 25 plus 9, which is equal to 34. So if c squared is 34, then c is equal to square root of 34. And you have to write it twice. Now square root of 34 is approximately going to be about 5 point something. It's not quite 6. So you just make it right before 6 and label it. And right before 6 and label it. So remember, these are almost like two Pac-Mans. So you have to make sure that your graph is going towards the focus both times. So both in a parabola and a hyperbola, the curves are going to go towards the focus. Alright, and that's your picture. Alright, last question on this review packet is this is not in standard form, so we have to divide to make that happen. So you divide by 125, and when you do that you wind up getting y squared over 25 minus x squared over 5 equals 1. So remember, the bigger number, the first number, I'm so sorry. The first number is your going to be your vertex. So that means A is our vertex. So that's going to be the square root of 25, which is 5. Since it's on the y-axis, you have to write it as 0, 5, and 0, negative 5. And that's also where you're going to plot it. Now since everything seems to be on the y-axis, that's your major axis. That's like that transverse axis, which means everything you do on this picture is going to be on that axis, meaning you're going to go up and you're going to go down. Alright, we also need to take the square root of the second number, that's b. So the square root of 5 is just simply the square root of 5. So we can keep that somewhere to help us with the graph. Okay, the square root of 5 is approximately 2 point something, but it's not exactly 3, so we're going to go in the middle of 2 and 3 to make our point for b. Label that as square root of 5, 0, and negative square root of 5, 0. So now it's time to make our box. Okay, so when you make your box, you just go and meet up with the b value. Connect. Go and meet up with the b value. And connect. Then we'll connect from left to right as well. So now we need to make our asymptote. Our asymptote has to go from corner to corner. So if you go from the center to the corner, and then continue. Go from the center to the corner, and continue. There is your asymptote. Asymptote is how far up and over are you going? So you're going up 5 over square root 5. Now the thing is, you're not allowed to have square roots in the denominator. We never went through that whole process, but you should have in geometry. But this is really equal to 5 square root 5 over 5, which is really square root 5x. Don't worry, this will not be on the test. And then here, it'll be negative square root 5x. Please do not ask me a million questions about these. It is not on the test, okay? We gave you nice whole numbers to work with on the test. Alright, so now I'm going to actually make my curve. My curve has to go up and down. So I'm going to go up this way, surrounding my asymptote, and down this way, surrounding my asymptote. Now the last thing to do is your focus. So your focus is going to be equal to a squared minus b squared, plus b squared. So a squared was 25 and b squared was 5. So it's the square root of 30. So you could have simply just went into your denominators and just added your denominators for the focus. And then take the square root. So because it's in line with the vertex, it'll be 0 square root 30 and 0 negative square root 30. So that is approximately equal to 5 point something and negative 5 point something. As long as so think about Pac-Man. As long as your focus, the curves are going towards the focus, you are fine. And that is it for graphing the focus, the hyperbolas. Now, I do have this other one here, but if you want those answers, you can come see me. These were for people that were here that needed that extra review. So, here is the stuff for hyperbolas. You have two equations. Okay, this equation is going to be more horizontal, so you're going left and right. This equation is vertical, you're going up and down. Your vertex is here on the y-axis. And your vertex here is on the x-axis. Okay, your focus is going to be equal to the Pythagorean theorem. So just remember that. Also remember, when we give you, because what happens is we're going to have you do the equation. So let me do a quick one for you. Let's say the vertices of your equation that you're trying to find, let's say the vertices were 6, 0, and negative 6, 0, and your focus was at 10, 0, and negative 10, 0. Suppose you needed the equation, because we didn't give you that under review. So to get the equation, all you're going to do is do the Pythagorean theorem. C squared equals a squared plus b squared. Remember, vertex is always A. On the little mini quiz, the exit card, you guys were getting these mixed up. Okay, the vertex is always smaller than the focus with hyperbolas. Okay, so my focus is going to be bigger. Okay, so that 10 is C. So I have 10 squared equals 6 squared plus b squared. 100 equals 36 plus b squared minus 36. B squared equals 64. I do not need to solve for b, just b squared. So now what you're going to do is you have to decide which equation. Well, since a is on the x-axis, I'm going to be using the equation that starts with x. So a squared, we found out was 36, so that goes underneath here. B squared we found out was 64, and it equals 1. Okay, 36 does not always have to be bigger, okay? The vertex is always first, but it does not always have to be bigger. You have to know this. It's on the test. Look at your light green packet if you want to do more practice. Alright, so how do I know you watched this video? How do I know that I didn't just make this 30-something minute video and you didn't watch it? Well, if you watch this video, ask me this question when you see me in class on Monday, or if you see me in class on Tuesday. I want you to ask me, how were my races on Saturday and Sunday? And I want you to ask me what my race was on Saturday and how many miles, and what my race was on Sunday and how many miles. Once you come up to me and ask me those questions, I'll know that you watched the video. Alright guys, good luck on this test. I don't want anything lower than a C. This is easy stuff. Remember, retakes. Oh, last announcement. Retakes. If you want to retake any of the 4 exit cards, you have Monday at 10:30, or you have Tuesday at 10:30. If you fail to show up any of these 2 times, you cannot retake. Do not come in here on Wednesday asking to retake, because I will say no. Because once Wednesday comes, we are moving to a new unit. Alright, boys and girls, that's it. That's all of my time I have for you. So good luck on the test. First and third period, I hope that you guys will be okay. And 8th period, we have one more day of review. Alrighty, bye.